Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be discussing what is an Arminian, and after we get through discussing what an Arminian is, I'll have a few resources to look into Arminianism and Methodism, so stick around for that. One is we are classical Protestants. We affirm the historic creeds of the faith, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. We affirm the five solas, which is Sola Scriptura, Deo Gloria, Gratia, Christus, and Fide. To anyone who doesn't know what that is, and the Gospel Coalition actually has a pretty good article on this. If you just Google it, it'll pop up, which is Scripture alone is the only infallible rule of faith. Not the only rule of faith, just the only infallible rule of faith. Christus is Christ alone. Fide is faith alone. Gratia is grace alone. And Deo Gloria is glory to God alone. It's the five big solas of the Reformation. And one that you'll often hear that Arminians and Wesleyans don't hold to is sola fide, despite the constant affirmation. And I think I'll just read a little bit of John Wesley's sermon, Free Grace, and part of the introduction to kind of demonstrate that. This is from John Wesley's Sermons and Anthology. This is point 3. First, it is free in all to whom it is given. It does not depend on any power or merit in man, no, not in any degree, neither in whole nor in part. It does not in any wise depend either on the good works or righteousness of the receiver, not on anything he has done or anything he is. It does not depend on his endeavors. It does not depend on his good tempers or good desires or good purposes and intentions. For all these flow from the free grace of God. They are the streams only, not the fountain. They are the fruits of free grace, and not the root. They are not the cause, but the effects of it. Whatsoever good is in man or is done by man, God is the author and doer of. Thus is his grace free in all. That is, no way depending on any power or merit in man, but on God alone, who freely gave us his own Son, and with him freely giveth us all things. Again, that is John Wesley's sermon, Free Grace, which a beautiful sermon, and his view of grace also extends into sola fide, that salvation is through faith alone, through grace alone. This may be one of the dividing points between us and, say, our Roman Catholic and Eastern and Oriental and all the other various Orthodox groups, but that is the classic Protestant teaching, and that is something that Wesley and Arminius both held to very firmly, despite what some critics might say. For an Arminian, you'll hold to the teachings of Jacob Arminius, and if you're an Arminian who's never heard that before, you're not alone. But I'm hoping through here and other places I can give you a way to tap into the roots of Arminianism and learn what it is actually about. And then for Arminians, any group or individual that strays from these teachings are not true Arminians. But sadly, many often think of Arminians when they think of these heretical and or heterodox movements within it, which is just groups that range from having an error that is damnable, such as, say, a Pelagian, at least historically affirmed by the church, or a semi-Pelagian, all the way to simply having errors in doctrine that we would disagree with. Part of this likely stems from how both the past and present there has been a bad habit of labeling anything that isn't a Calvinist as an Arminian. And that's not necessarily by the Reformed. This is, in my experience, most often by the Arminians themselves. I've seen plenty of people who simply label themselves, I'm an Arminian because I stand for free will, which is not really the big interest of Arminian classical teaching in the first place, but is also not really what makes one an Arminian. All right, you see this with figures like Philip Limborch, who sadly came to be a leader in the Remonstrant and strayed from Arminius' teachings, or later figures like Charles Finney in the Methodist movement. For more on figures like Limborch, Roger Eilson's Arminian Theology, Myths and Realities, which we'll get to later in this video, is a good book. And this is a vital part of discussions with others, and that is that Arminianism isn't a full theological system. There is a character, as I already mentioned, is an emphasis on free will, but that was never what Arminianism was about, and sadly, many have strayed from what Arminius and then later John Wesley taught, and others have taught as a specific understanding of predestination. It's not about man's free will, but God's free grace. And the only real difference, in my experience, between many Reformed and historic Arminians is this particular difference in understanding on predestination. Arminius died in good standing with the Dutch Reformed because of a lot of his theology was very much still in line with Reformed theology. And when he was speaking out, and I'll have a video on Arminius at a later point, it's not like he was just speaking into things that were already firmly established. This was before the Synod of Dort. This was shortly after Calvin's lifetime. Arminius studied directly under Calvin's protege, and things are still very fresh in the Reformed movement at this point. So it's not like he's a rebel. He's not trying to rock the boat and cause problems. He's just trying to figure things out and correct what he thinks are some errors. And I, of course, agree with him as an Arminian. And the largest center of this debate, which will also have its own video, is on how much we can reject God and what we argue predestination and election means with the tying into that exact rule of foreknowledge. Unfortunately, predestination is not a simple video, or a simple topic, but it is a vast web of things that are connected. In the show notes, there will be a link to a Ryan Reeves video that I talked about in my last video as well, on George Whitefield and the Wesley brothers, and he does a beautiful job sort of showing how Arminianism versus Calvinism in the historical sense shouldn't be a dividing point between brothers, as it shouldn't be in our conversations here. It's an important issue, but not one to be breaking fellowships and friendships over, especially if you're, say, new to either side. I know people who've converted, in quotes there, to Arminianism or Calvinism and sort of taken on that view, and then everyone hears about the stage, or the cage stage, and they sort of become really aggressive and sort of feral. I think that's something we want to try and avoid, especially when you're new into learning something. You need to be slow and careful and take your time. We don't have to pretend these issues don't exist. We don't have to share these pulpits with each other when we have these problems. We can just agree to disagree as we're digging into these things. And I suspect for many Reformed and Arminians who may or may not listen to these videos, this may be the first time you ever encounter Jacob Arminius or John Wesley, as I cite them and point to places to find them. But that is absolutely something that needs to be dug into, and I hope I can help with that. Now we're going to move into the next part of this video. Sorry, that one ran a little bit longer than intended. A podcast I would recommend on just generic Arminianism is the Remonstrance podcast. They actually have 2 episodes I'm aware of that deal with this, which is their mini-sode, episode 11, and then episode 5 addresses this particular topic, and they'll talk about Wesleyan Arminianism, which is where we factor in John Wesley and his teachings and his doctrines, and the Methodist movement and other sources there into defining what a Wesleyan Arminian is. They delve into a lot of the sources that I'll be listing below, and they'll have a few that I don't mention here that are definitely worth checking out. I'm just not going to bring them up here. But as I will say with all things, it is much better to have both myself and them, and then go read the whole work for yourself that either they or myself will cite, especially when someone isn't going through every part of a text, as they don't, and I definitely won't be in a lot of these videos. Despite how long this video might be, I'm going to be trying to keep my videos a bit shorter, so I'm just not going to be delving into the full text. There's just a lot to dig into. One of the first books I would recommend, and you'll see this little section over here is empty. It's because I've moved these books into reach. It is Arminian Theology, Myths and Realities by Roger Olson. This is a great book. This, of course, is the physical copy. You can also order an ebook. It's available on Logos, I believe. You can also find on Logos, I only have one of the volumes on me currently. I have the other 2 en route. This is the complete works of Jacob Arminius. Ooh, that is quite shiny. And here's kind of what it looks like. This is the London edition, as you'll see it called. And I will have a link in the show notes for this as well. You can find all 3 volumes of his collected works online. I don't know if it's just the London edition or if they're all like this. The specific layout of this does not match the online one. So when I reference this, I'm using the physical copies I have. I will do my best to always reference where in the online and in the physical copy I'm using, where exactly to find it. But if it doesn't match up, that's why. Another source I'd recommend is not this one. This one is Arminius and his Declaration of Sentiments. I recommend the Stephen Gunter translation. It's annotated and with some commentary. You can find a complete PDF of the whole thing, unannotated, on the Evangelical Arminian Society's website and on CCAL. It's Christian Classic Thorough Library, I believe. If you just type in CCAL into the Google search bar, you can find it. They have tons of great resources. And you can find just the sentiments themselves. But Arminius is not an easy person to read. He was a reformed individual, and he wrote like a scholar. His works can be really dense and really hard to understand. I regularly have to go through his things multiple times. And then this one is good. This is Jacob Arminius, Theologian of Grace. As I said above, Arminianism and John Wesley following suit, the huge focus was on grace, not free will. Theologian of Grace is very, very good. Now, before we move into Methodism, if you have the money, one thing I would really recommend, and though this is called the Methodist and Wesley Library Bundle on Logos, it is 136 volumes, including the complete collection of Jacob Arminius, but it's not cheap. I think when I saw it, it was $400 to $500. If you have the money, or you can make payment plans, it'll have all these. It's definitely worth the money, and there's absolutely a benefit to having a physical and a digital copy of things. But if you don't have the money, buy the works as you can. That is just one thing I would recommend. If you can save up for it, or if you can make payment plans, that's going to give you, I think, all of these, if not all of them, pretty close, and then tons of other works that I will recommend as time goes on. And then looking into Methodism, I left the book in my bag. We are professional quality here. This is Wesley and the People Called Methodist. This is a history book. It's by Richard P. Heitzen, a phenomenal history book. It was, I don't know if it still is, was one of the go-to history books for Methodism for a very long time. I talked with Kevin Watson about this myself, and I guess they have a second edition out now. This is the first edition. I'm not sure what differences there will be, but when I reference it in my videos, I'm referencing the first edition because that's the one I own. I'm also going to, again, recommend the Remonstrance podcast. It talks about Wesleyanism just like Arminianism. And then here on this YouTube channel, I'm wanting to move some playlists onto my channel. So if you click onto the profile for PCL, hopefully there will be playlists for Methodist history, Methodist theology, just what I can get together. I have playlists on another account. I'm hoping to move them here. Next is Thomas C. Oden. He is perhaps, if not the greatest Methodist theologian we have had, if not in our lifetimes, ever. He's really, really good. I don't think you can undervalue Thomas Oden. He wrote a systematic theology, which I don't own. I have a digital copy. I have access to a digital copy anyway, called Classic Christianity. What I do have of his that I highly recommend is John Wesley's Teachings. It comes in 4 volumes, and phenomenal work. As with everything I've mentioned thus far, I believe you can find it on Logos and such. And this is really good. In his classical theology, systematic theology book, if you get it, I think it's about 900 pages. It's quite dense, and it is a systematic theology. So if that's not for you, just a heads up. But if you're looking to really dig into Wesleyan Arminian theology and just more ancient historic theology, that is absolutely a place to go. Another thing I would recommend, once you kind of want to start digging deeper into the Wesleyan tradition, would be the minutes of several conversations, which you can have a physical copy. I believe I'm going to have a link in the show notes below, but you can also find them online. If you look up the Wesley Institute online, which will also be linked below, wesley.nnu.edu. Tons of great resources on there. One voice I would speak for modern Methodism is Jeffrey Rickman. I believe his show on YouTube is called Plain Spoken. He has a lot of more type of news and interviews and comments on modern Methodism. So if you want to try and keep up with Methodism today, he's one of the voices I would recommend for that. Then, of course, are the methods. And for these, I would recommend Kevin Watson. Let's move John Wesley. And that is going to be these 2 books. the class meeting, and the band meeting. These are sort of two of the super important, distinct things about historic Methodism, and I really hope a lot of Methodist churches start recovering these desperately in our time post-UMC split. One of the things that definitely led up to that was dropping things like the class meeting. This is something we really need to recover. And I will have videos on the methods at a later time. I'm just going to recommend those books now. And he's written other books as well. He has his own blog, kevinwatson.com. He hasn't written in a bit since he's moved to Tulsa, and he's taken a job with Asbury Seminary and Asbury Church. And you can find that on his blog. He's talked about that there. But I believe he's going to try and get back to it at some point. And in the meantime, he has a ton of great works on his blog. Any works of John Wesley, his sermons, his letters, he had a immense corpus of work. And you can find, I think, all of them, if not pretty much all of his works, on the Wesley Institute, wesley.nu.edu. And it's just such a good resource. I can't recommend it enough. Of course, I always like to have the physical copies, but if money's tight, or if you're mainly doing it for research purposes, being able to hit Control F on a keyboard to find something really quickly is always handy. A few just other theologians I would recommend. I'm not going to have any particular works here on me. Thomas Coke, Richard Watson, Justo L. Gonzalez. He's more of a historian, but he's written quite a few history books, theological history books, sort of discussing the development of doctrines and their movements throughout history. Both Charles and John Wesley, and Thomas Oden I mentioned above, and you'll probably hear me talk about many other voices more throughout the years. If you guys want more resources, just let me know in the comments, and down the line perhaps I can do a live Q&A or just another video kind of going into these. This one's run a bit longer than I intend to make my videos, but I think it's worth it to kind of go through all of these. And I hope this has been a good introduction into Arminianism. In the future, we'll be discussing many topics, but we will start with some of the things that I think are the most misunderstood about classical Arminian and Wesleyan teaching, both by modern-day Wesleyan Arminians, or people who claim to be Wesleyan Arminians, and by critics of the tradition. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. And to list a few topics that we will be going over through, I'm not sure how long, this year, maybe into next year. It's going to be stuff like original sin, predestination, God's will, man's will, all topics that are important, but I urge anyone listening to discuss with Christian love and charity, both with myself and anyone in the comments, or in any discussion you have anywhere. Remembering how we are told to treat each other regardless of what the other person is saying. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. 1 Thessalonians 5:15. With that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. You guys have a good day.